Hello everybody, BJ Let's Plays here, doing something I usually don't do on my channel, which is a kind of a quick little casual tech review, item review. This is this thing you're seeing a picture of here is the Buwico Dualshock, and what this is a third-party controller made by this Buwico company. I believe are Chinese, but don't quote me on that. And the idea here is that this is a cheaper substitute for the official first-party DualShock. And to an extent, that is true. But we'll get into the ups and downs of this particular piece of tech in just a moment here. Um, so you'll notice up at the top there they claim that it is for precise control. The feel, shape, and sensitivity of this controller's analog sticks and trigger buttons have been enhanced to offer players absolute control for PS4. Now, slightly wonky English aside, what they're getting at there basically is that there's grips on the the bottom part of the controller, which is, in fact, if you look closely, you can kind of see them in this picture. It's under the blue lines on the handles, as well as on the thumbsticks. And I guess whether or not these give you more control is kind of a, up to each individual consumer, but they are definitely there. And, if you're looking for more thumbstick precision, I suppose that is something to consider. Thumbsticks are also very clicky, which is interesting. It's not true of the normal DualShock, the first party one. The other thing, and as well, the triggers are kind of harder to push down than on a normal DualShock. Again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is going to kind of depend on your preferences. I don't mind it, although personally I kind of prefer the somewhat lighter touch that the first-party Sony DualShocks have. The other thing with the buttons, except for that thing in the center, which we'll get to in a little bit, is the bumpers are kind of weirdly gummy. Not to the degree that they feel like they're broken or anything, it's just there's not a lot of clickiness to them. Again, sort of a personal preference thing, but I think that one is probably something that's a bit more likely to annoy most people. The face buttons, all perfectly fine. I might even say that the face buttons are a little bit better than the normal DualShock, but I suppose that depends on if you prefer the slightly more rounded half sphere style they've got going on here. Not half sphere. It's a little bit more raised off the controller is what I'm getting at, or the flatter ones on the regular the Sony DualShocks. The start and share buttons are just barely clickable, but those are the ones you're going to be using least of all. So I think that's not really that big of a deal. The D-pad is fine. It's not separated into discrete buttons the same way the Sony controllers are, which I kind of prefer that, but as far as D-pads on modern controllers go, you can do a lot worse than this. As for the, for lack of a better term, the power, you can probably kind of tell if you look above the central button. You'll see that this is actually a wired controller rather than a wireless one, which does mean that if that wire breaks or frays or whatever else, you will have to either get it repaired, which can be expensive and time-consuming, or you will just have to get a new controller. Obviously, a new controller is a bit of a bigger investment than a new USB cord. This retails for $25, by the way. I think I said that already, but I may have forgotten to, which would be embarrassing, but yeah, $26 actually. Sorry, $25.99. I still try to tell you on their Amazon store page. Pardon me. Goodness gracious. So, I mean, this versus like $8 to $10 for a new USB cord, that is something to consider if you have small children or pets, that kind of thing. My main issue with this though, at least as far as being a PS4 controller, and there is obviously an alternate use for it that we'll get to in a bit, is that this thing in the middle that looks like a touchpad is actually not a touchpad. It is just a single large button, kind of like what you would find on the like below the touchpads on a laptop. Um, and as far as I can tell, I tested it with several games. It does not do anything in on the PS4. I know for a fact that it sends like there's a switch or something under here because it does do things in other contexts sometimes. But as far as PlayStation 4 games, the ones I tested it with, I could not get it to do anything. No gesture menu in Dark Souls, no menu in Skyrim, um, that kind of thing does not work. So, as far as being a primary PS4 controller, I would advise you to just get a first-party Sony Dualshock. As a secondary PS4 controller, like if you've got a lot of fighting games and somebody at your home that you play with or you have friends over often, or the arcade classic series that they sell on there for $8 a piece, and you want to do local co-op with something like that, I think for that purpose it is very much completely acceptable. And for some games, it's fine. Anything that's fairly simple that doesn't make use of the touchpad, you can definitely get by with this. And in some respects, I actually think the build is a little bit better, at least in terms of immediate quality, than the DualShocks from Sony. But that the lack of a touchpad is going to be a big deal breaker for a lot of people. And again, as far as being a primary PS4 controller, I would really steer you elsewhere. Another thing to note is just kind of a minor complaint, at least for me, though if you are disabled or have problems with bending over, this might be more of an issue for you. You cannot, even if the controller is plugged in, you cannot use the home button to turn on the console as you can with a Sony DualShock. I don't know why that's like that, but that is how it is. 1 second, please. Sorry, I had to clear my throat and figured that I had already done that enough on microphone's video. Anyway, the other use for this is as a controller for your PC. And in general, DualShocks are not the best for that because for first-party Sony DualShocks, you have to use a pass-through program called DS for Windows in order to basically trick your computer, provided using Windows, that is, to basically trick your computer into thinking that your DualShock is an Xbox controller. But the issue with the Buwico is that it is not picked up by DS for Windows. I fiddled around with it, and I could not get it to recognize that this controller existed, much less to make it do anything. So that is a bit of a problem as well. On the other hand, I did try it with a couple different games that I knew supported, like natively supported DualShock 4 input, and it worked all right. You do occasionally get like unknown joypad errors. I got one when I tried it with the Binding of Isaac. And for emulators that support DualShock 4 input, in particular, the SNES 9X emulator for Super Nintendo games works beautifully. That said, if you're looking for a PC controller, there are a plethora of other options. You buy a 360 controller, an Xbox One controller. What is that company? Logitech makes PC like USB controllers. Plenty of other companies do. There's the Steam controllers. There's a wealth of options. So, in that sense, the Buwico kind of is in a weird spot because it's acceptable but not ideal as a PS4 controller, and it's acceptable but not ideal as a PC controller. So, who I would recommend this to is to people in the same situation that I am, where you want a backup controller for both of those things, and are okay with paying a slightly lower, or are okay with getting like not quite the ideal product for a slightly lower price. So that's basically where the Buwico is at. If it had a working touchpad, it would be a much easier to recommend thing. But for whatever reason, it does not. And one weird thing to note is that, as I alluded to earlier, you can actually, with various programs that let you rebind buttons, the dummy touchpad, which is, again, just basically a big mouse button in the middle of the controller, it does work. You can bind things to that if you want to, like, bind that to bringing up the menu or something. That is something you can pretty easily do. But for whatever reason, not only is it not a functioning touchpad, it doesn't do anything at all on the PS4, at least as far as I can tell. So, I mean, that's really the big hang-up with this thing. The other stuff, the bumpers, that's all pretty minor. I would also like to know, real quick, this came kind of not in, like... It seems as though it's been handled a bit roughly at the factory. There's, like, some very small, like, little nicks on it and smudges and stuff. Stuff that, if you are buying this for, like, a child or something, they're not going to care. But it is a little odd to see a controller come in that condition, especially because it came in a, like, bubble-wrapped bag. So, it's a little unusual. But, it does work. Like, no problems as far as connectivity or anything like that. It's just, again, the touchpad really is the big hang-up. There is also one more thing. On the Amazon picture here, you'll notice the buttons are not labeled. That is actually not accurate. They are labeled on the controller, although they use slightly different versions of the cross, square, triangle, and circle symbols than the first-party Dualshocks do. I assume that's for, like, trademark reasons or something. But they are labeled. The paint is also a good deal duller than it appears in this picture. It's not a bright blue like that. It's more of a dark, subdued blue. And only that little bit, that little white strip above the home button actually lights up. None of the rest of the controller lights up. And in fact, there is not even a top light like there is with the Sony DS4s, which again, these are all fairly minor things, but they are worth mentioning. So yeah, that is about the size of the Buwico, and I just spent 15 minutes basically telling you that, the touchpad doesn't work. But, again, I didn't see a ton of, like, stuff out there for this thing, so I thought I would throw my 2 cents into the ring. That's about all. If you like the video, please like the video on YouTube. You can subscribe if you like, although to be quite honest with you, I'm not gonna, put up a smoke screen. I don't do videos like this particularly often. This is in fact my first one. Maybe there will be more, who knows. But yeah, that's the Buwico DualShock. It's alright. That's the final verdict, 3 stars out of 5. 2.5 if I'm in a bad mood, I guess. Anyway, that is all for this video. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.